Hi, Film Loom here. Today I'm going to explain a thriller/crime movie called The Escapists. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens inside a high-security prison where an old man named Frank Perry is deep in thought. From his expressions, it is evident that he is going to do something drastic and bold that he has never done before. Frank slowly goes out and walks to the cell of the prison's main gangster, Riza. Elsewhere, in the prison's laundry room, 4 other inmates are preparing to escape. These include Lenny, who was in for 8 years, Viv Batista, who has a sentence of 12 years, a middle-aged man named Brody who is serving life imprisonment, and a young lad named Lacey, who has a 7-year term. They hastily break the ground around the drainage inlet and make a hole enough for a human to fit in. The group then gets inside one by one except for Brody, who seems to be waiting for his close friend Frank. It turns out that all of these inmates were expecting Frank to show up instead of Lacey. After waiting for a good while, Brody eventually gives up and heads down the hole. But he accidentally forgets his cap on the floor, right next to the hole. A few minutes later, Frank, who seems to be bleeding from his abdomen region, arrives at the spot. He grabs Brody's cap and slips right into the hole. The scene shifts abruptly to several months ago, where Frank is on laundry duty. He grabs all the clothes that need to be washed from various cells and takes them to the room where a huge industrial-scale washing machine is kept. This seems to be a regular job for Frank, who is serving a life imprisonment. As there is no hope for him to get out, Frank seems to have accepted the harsh realities of prison life. He does his job, keeps his head down, and doesn't mess with the prison gangster Riza. He is now towards the later end of his life and has his own group of friends here. One afternoon, Frank returns back from his laundry duty, only to see his cellmate packing his bag. The latter's jail term has come to an end and he is heading home. Meanwhile, all the other inmates have gathered to see the new batch of prisoners. They are covered in antibacterial powder and are wearing nothing but underwear. Everyone is amused by this sight, especially Riz's younger brother Tony. He is a sadistic junkie who likes to physically assault good-looking inmates. Tony's eyes have already fallen on a newcomer, a pretty-looking youngster named Evan Lacey. Shortly afterwards, the new inmates are shown their cells and Lacey is placed with Frank. The youngster tries to introduce himself, but the latter doesn't seem to be interested. That evening, a mailboy drops a brown envelope in Frank's cell and he casually picks it up. It turns out our hero has been writing letters to his home, especially his daughter, for the past 14 years. He has never got a single reply and doesn't think he will ever get one. But to Frank's utter surprise, the brown envelope actually contains a letter from his wife. It reads that their beloved daughter has recently been admitted to hospital due to drug overdose. Frank's entire world turns upside down as he realizes that the person he loves the most in this world is now close to death. Extremely disturbed, he stumbles to the prison's chapel a few hours later. A guard, who seems to be kind towards the old inmate, opens the door despite this being an odd time to visit. He even lets Frank have some privacy in there and waits outside. Frank then goes into the confession box where he takes out the letter from his pocket. He breaks down momentarily and says that he must meet his daughter. The very next day, while Frank is on laundry duty, he notices something that piques his curiosity. There are air vents made into a steel plate right behind the laundry room's washing machine. Overhead and connected to the same wall as the washing machine are metal pipes that seem to take the water out of the room. Suddenly, this lights a few bulbs in Frank's head and he later has a chat with his long-time friend Brody. He asks if the air vents connect to the sewer system that go out of the prison. Brody is initially surprised as to why his friend would ask about such a strange topic. But then Frank shows him the letter from his daughter and reveals that she may pass away at any moment. Frank now wants to get out of the prison and wants help to do so. Turns out, Brody has previously dug under the prison and has extensive knowledge about the whole establishment. He eventually agrees to help his friend as he too is serving a life imprisonment. A few days later, Frank approaches Lenny, a notorious thief and an amateur boxer who was supposed to be out on parole. But Frank's old cellmate snitched on Lenny, and his parole is now cancelled. The boxer is now dying for revenge and Frank takes advantage of this situation. He reveals that he is planning to break out of the prison and Lenny, being skillful with tools, will be extremely valuable for this task. Lenny is a bit doubtful at first, but he eventually agrees to the plan. Sometime later, Frank hosts a meeting with the other two inmates in the canteen. They pretend to play dominoes while discussing their way out of the prison. There is only one way to freedom, and it passes through the laundry room. They will have to walk through 3 guarded doors to reach there. But Frank suggests a different pathway. He had gone to the chapel a few days ago and noticed something odd with the confession booth. Its walls were made of flimsy wood, and turns out that it is directly attached to the laundry room. If they can break through the confession box, they can easily reach the adjacent room while staying undetected. Once they reach the laundry, they can pass through the air vents and make their way to the sewers below. But for that, they will need to break the steel plate which contains the air vents. That night, as the lights in the prison are switched off, Lenny gets to work. He takes out metal pipes from his room's chair and fits a small bolt up top. He hopes that this tool will help them cut through the steel plate. Elsewhere, Frank goes into the cell of the prison's biggest inmate, a 6 feet 4 inch, 230-pound behemoth named 2 Ton. Frank claims that Lenny has challenged him to a one-on-one fight. Meanwhile, we get some more details about their plan. The laundry vent will take them to the top of a sump from where they can head to the drainage system underneath the prison. The drainage pipes will then take them underneath a nearby river, and if they pass that, they will come right below a train station. However, they will have to make it past the train tracks before rush hour starts. The tracks carry 650 volts of electricity, and if they reach it any later, everyone will get electrocuted to death. The trio then agree to ramp up the preparations and break out 3 days later. Unbeknownst to them, the junkie, Tony, has been keenly watching from nearby. That night, all the inmates gather in the canteen to watch 2 Ton and Lenny go head to head. The giant is obviously too powerful and beats the lights out of Lenny. However, the latter manages to sneak a thundering punch that knocks out a diamond-encrusted tooth from 2 Ton's mouth. Lenny quickly gathers the teeth before the guards break up the fight. Later, while everyone is asleep, Lenny glues the diamond to the bolt of his metal pipe-like tool that he created a day ago. The scene then shifts to the present, where this group of fleeing inmates has reached the air vent behind the washing machine. Lenny uses the sharp edge of the diamond attached with his tool to cut through the steel plate. The group then comes out to the other side, where they soon see the sewers. Unfortunately, they will now have to travel deep into the sewers so that they can pass underneath a river that flows near the prison. Back in the past, the inmates are all taking a bath in the common shower room. Tony, who had seen the discussions, approaches Frank and asks if everything is all right. It is obvious that he knows the old man is up to something. He then tells Frank to keep the door to his cell open and promises to visit the next day. Later, Frank informs his partners about the incident, and it immediately dampens everyone's mood. Everyone knows that Tony is untouchable since he is the brother of the prison's main gangster, Riza. If they sit back and don't do anything about him, their plan is guaranteed to be exposed. Thus, Frank proposes to bring someone else into their group who can help with this problem, Viv Batista. He is a prisoner who is in charge of handing small dosages of drugs to inmates who are addicted to such stuff. It is all a part of the government's plan where drug addicts are slowly taken off these substances by gradually decreasing the dosages. The next afternoon, Frank has a chat with Batista in the prison's library. He wants the drug lord to help silence Tony by any means necessary. In return, the old man promises to give him his freedom by taking him out of the prison. Batista immediately agrees and has a rather sinister plan that will silence Tony forever. He intends to make a large batch of drugs, laced with poison, and sneak it out of the lab. Frank will then take the drugs and give it to Tony the following day. The scene shifts to the present as the inmates, Frank, Lenny, Brody and Batista somehow make it past the river. They emerge on the other side, only to discover that the whole sewer system has been blocked by a concrete wall. Tensions begin to flare as their entire plan disintegrates right in front of their eyes. Lenny, who seems to be infuriated with Lacey, pushes him to the wall and punches him. However, when the newbie ducks, Lenny ends up punching a hole in the concrete. This makes the group realize that the wall has been freshly constructed and immediately begin to break it. In a matter of a few minutes, they successfully make a large hole in the wall, enough for a single person to pass through. Brody, being the most experienced in such scenarios, slithers right into the hole. He begins to dig frantically using his hands, when suddenly bad luck strikes. A portion of the freshly constructed wall collapses and he is trapped under the rubble. Frank hurriedly digs out whatever dirt he can with his hands and manages to reach his friend. Although Brody is not conscious, he seems to be breathing just fine. Back in the past, morning arrives, which means Frank is getting ready for a visit from Tony. The old man has a stash of drugs in his locker that has been secretly laced with poison. He plans to hand it to Tony so that the latter will snort it and eventually pass out. Unfortunately, the junkie doesn't arrive alone in Frank's cell. He has brought another weird inmate with him. Tony grabs the poison stash of drugs and gives it to the weirdo. He then turns his attention to Lacey, who is still asleep in the top bunker. It is obvious that Tony fancies Lacey and wants to physically abuse him. However, the new inmate fights back and beats Tony with a nearby chair. The weirdo sees this and immediately bolts away with the stash of poisoned drugs. On the other hand, Tony is so hurt that he stumbles outside the cell in a disillusioned state. He eventually ends up falling down a flight of stairs, leading to his death. In the present, the escaping group of inmates move forward while taking turns to carry the injured Brody. They soon reach an abandoned train station and realize that they are on the right track. Lacey tries to help Frank, who is profusely bleeding from his abdomen region, but the old man urges everyone to keep on moving. At this moment, they hear noises of dogs approaching the station and realize that the cops are after them. It is now a matter of life and death, and they are forced to leave the unconscious Brody behind. The group then runs away to their next obstacle, a small but deep reservoir. It is not a difficult task to cross it, but they struggle to do so because Lenny doesn't know how to swim. Despite all these problems, the inmates manage to drag themselves across the reservoir and reach the train tracks. Back in the past, Riza pays a visit to Frank's cell. It is revealed that Lacey has been put into solitary confinement for the possible murder of Tony, the only other witness of that entire scuffle. Tony's weird friend has also died due to ingestion of poison drugs. So, Riza wants to know exactly how his brother was murdered. He then